The United States of America is the only developed country on Earth where life expectancy is declining. Not stagnating, declining. Americans are dying younger than they did a decade ago. And they are dying younger than people in countries with a fraction of America's wealth, a fraction of its military budget, a fraction of its GDP, and a fraction of its healthcare spending. The United States spends more on healthcare than any other country in the history of civilization, approximately $4.5 trillion per year, and it delivers the worst health outcomes of any OECD nation. The worst. Not the second worst. Not in the middle. The worst. Life expectancy began falling in 2014. It fell again in 2015, 2016, and 2017. That was the longest sustained decline in life expectancy in the United States in a century, since the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Then COVID hit and took it down further. And even after the pandemic subsided, the recovery in life expectancy has been slower in America than in virtually every other developed nation on Earth. Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton and Princeton researcher Ann Case documented what they called deaths of despair, a term that has entered the economic lexicon because the reality it describes is so distinctly American. Drug overdoses, alcoholic liver disease, and suicide. Those three causes of death have been climbing steadily since the 1990s, and they are overwhelmingly concentrated among working-class Americans without bachelor's degrees. Case described them in the starkest possible terms when she said that people are either killing themselves quickly with a gun or a rope or killing themselves more slowly with drugs or with alcohol. And the number of drug overdose deaths has quadrupled since 1999, with approximately 500,000 Americans losing their lives to opioid overdoses alone. Overdoses now kill more Americans than suicides, motor vehicle accidents, firearms, and homicides combined. And if you are watching this video right now and something inside you has been telling you that something is fundamentally wrong with this country, something beyond the numbers they put on the news, something deeper than the inflation rate or the unemployment figure or the GDP report, you are not imagining it. Your instinct is correct. Something is wrong, and the data proves it, and it is about to get worse. And this is not a new decline. The researchers at the National Academies documented that before the pandemic, U.S. life expectancy fell from 2014 through 2017, the longest sustained decline in a century. Americans already had the highest chronic disease burden among all OECD countries, the highest rates of obesity, among the highest rates of diabetes, among the highest rates of heart disease, among the highest rates of maternal mortality among developed nations, and spending more than double what most of those countries spend per capita on healthcare while producing worse outcomes across virtually every metric. The United States spends approximately $12,500 per person per year on healthcare. Switzerland spends approximately $7,100. Germany spends approximately $6,500. The United Kingdom spends approximately $5,400. And all three of those countries have higher life expectancies than the United States. The American healthcare system is not delivering health. It is delivering profit to the entities that own it, while the population it is supposed to serve gets sicker, dies younger, and pays more for the privilege than any other population in the developed world. And the feeling that something is wrong, the feeling that the system is not working the way it is supposed to work, is not a feeling. It is a medical fact documented in the mortality tables of the richest country in human history. The richest country in human history is producing a population that is sicker, more depressed, and more medicated than any generation before it. Dr. Stephen Wolfe, a researcher at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, said something in February 2026 that should have been the lead story on every network in America. He said that the most important policy changes that could improve health outcomes in America do not come from the Department of Health and Human Services. They come from economic policy. Because the health crisis is not primarily a medical crisis. It is an economic crisis that manifests in the body. It manifests as hypertension from chronic financial stress, as diabetes from food deserts and cheap processed calories that are the only ones affordable in a paycheck-to-paycheck household, as depression from the daily experience of working full-time and still not being able to afford rent, as addiction from the pain of watching the life your parents had become permanently unreachable regardless of how hard you work, as obesity from neighborhoods designed around cars because the jobs are 40 miles from the affordable housing, as heart disease accelerated by decades of deferred medical care because the deductible is $3,500 and you do not have $3,500. Wolf warned that we are going to see decades of data documenting the long-term consequences of what is happening now, comparing it to the Russian famine, where researchers tracked generational health damage long after the crisis itself had passed. Nearly 1 in 4 young girls in America have been found to self-harm. Emergency department visits for depression, mood disorders, self-harm, and suicide attempts among adolescents have surged. And at the exact moment that the mental health crisis among young people is reaching its worst documented levels, the funding for SAMHSA, the federal agency that supports mental health services, is being slashed by billions of dollars. The fire is growing, and the government is defunding the fire department, and the parents who are trying to hold their families together while managing their own financial anxiety, their own healthcare costs, their own job insecurity, and their own declining standard of living are being asked to somehow also address the mental health deterioration of their children without institutional support, without affordable therapy, without school counselors who have been cut in budget reductions, and without the time that would be required because the time is consumed by the second job or the overtime that is necessary to cover the rent increase that happened in January. And the connection between economic deterioration and mental health deterioration is not speculative. The research from the national academies and multiple institutions documented that measures of despair, including loneliness, distrust, physical pain, mental distress, and declining well-being, have been increasing in America since the 1980s. General Social Survey data shows happiness among Americans declining for 4 decades, while the same metric increased in countries like Australia. Trust in other people has been declining. Physical pain self-reports have been climbing. The number of days per month Americans report their mental health as not good has risen steadily. And the opioid epidemic that killed 500,000 Americans was not, according to Angus Deaton, primarily caused by the existence of opioids. It was caused by the demand for them. The demand was generated by pain, economic pain, the pain of watching your town hollow out as the factory closed, the pain of watching your children move away because there were no jobs, the pain of watching the life you were promised become permanently unreachable despite doing everything you were told to do. The opioids filled a void the economy created. When prescriptions were restricted, fentanyl filled the void instead, killing at an even higher rate because it is cheaper, more potent, and more lethal. The epidemic shifted. The despair that drove it did not. And that despair is not confined to rural white America anymore, if it ever was. Black Americans experienced higher mortality rates throughout the entire period, driven by the crack epidemic, the HIV crisis, and structural racism that produced worse outcomes across every category for generations. The despair is American. It crosses every demographic line, and it is being driven by an economy that is not delivering for the majority of people who participate in it. Billionaires are warning that the system is breaking, and they are the ones profiting from the breakage. In March 2026, Fortune magazine published an article in which billionaires themselves are warning that American wealth inequality is unsustainable. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, said that the widening wealth gap in the United States and other rich nations is causing populism to rise and risks creating irreconcilable differences in society that democratic order would not be equipped to handle. Read that sentence again. The founder of the largest hedge fund on earth is publicly warning that the economic system he personally benefited from more than almost any other human being alive is generating social fractures that democracy cannot survive. And Bank of America published data in January 2026 showing that pay for high and middle income earners rose 3% last year compared to only 1.5% for low-income households. That is the reverse of what happened during the early pandemic recovery, when low-income wages briefly outpaced high-income wages. The reversal means that the temporary modest correction in the direction of fairness that occurred during 2021 and 2022 has been fully unwound. The rich are pulling away faster again, and the bottom half is falling behind at an accelerating rate. The top 1% of American households now controls approximately 40% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 50% controls approximately 2.5%, 40% versus 2.5%. In the richest country in human history, and the Nobel Prize-winning economist who studied this inequality most rigorously, Angus Deaton described the American healthcare system as the perfect example of how rent-seeking generates inequality, enriching the few at the expense of many. He said the healthcare lobby has made the U.S. government complicit in keeping prices high, lining industry pockets as Americans literally pay the price, and the increase in healthcare costs is one of the factors holding wages down, further increasing the actual cost to Americans. The system does not merely fail to distribute wealth fairly. It actively redistributes wealth upward, extracting money from the people who can least afford to lose it and delivering it to the people who least need to receive it. And the mechanism of that extraction is the cost of being alive, the rent, the insurance premium, the deductible, the copay, the prescription, the grocery bill, the utility payment, the auto insurance. Every one of those costs is a transfer from the household that pays it to the corporation that collects it. And every one of those costs has risen faster than wages for 25 consecutive years. And the mechanism of extraction has become more sophisticated over time. In the 1990s, corporations profited by producing goods and services that people wanted to buy. In 2026, corporations profit by owning the systems that people have no choice but to use. You do not choose your health insurer. Your employer chooses it. You do not choose your electricity provider in most markets. There is one. You do not choose your internet provider in most neighborhoods. There is one. Or at best two. You do not choose your pharmacy benefits manager. You have never heard of your pharmacy benefits manager, but they determine what you pay for your prescriptions. The consolidation of the American economy into fewer and larger companies in virtually every sector, healthcare, insurance, banking, telecom, energy, food processing, retail, has eliminated the competitive pressure that was supposed to keep prices honest. When 4 companies control 85% of American beef processing, those 4 companies set the price. When 3 companies control the majority of health insurance in most states, those 3 companies set the premium. When 1 company provides electricity to your city, that company sets the rate, and the rate always rises, and the profits always grow, and the wages of the workers inside those companies grow at 1.5%, while the compensation of the executives grows at 15%. Corporate profit margins in the S&P 500 are near historic highs, despite a war, despite inflation, despite consumer distress, despite declining consumer sentiment. The corporations are not suffering alongside the consumers they serve. They are extracting from the suffering. That is not capitalism functioning. That is capitalism consuming. The labor market is a graveyard disguised as a dashboard, and the numbers they show you are designed to mislead you. Stanford's Economic Research Institute described the current labor market as a low-hire, low-fire equilibrium. That phrase sounds neutral. It is not. A low-hire, low-fire equilibrium means that companies have stopped growing their workforces but have not started cutting them. They are holding in place, and the reason they are holding in place is that they are waiting to see what happens with AI, waiting to see what happens with tariffs, waiting to see what happens with the war, waiting to see what happens with the debt ceiling. And while they wait, the Americans who need a job, who lost a job, who need a better job, who need a second job, are stuck in a market that is not hiring. Payroll employment increased just 0.4% over the past year, and nearly 90% of all net private job creation occurred in a single sector, healthcare. Strip healthcare out of the numbers, and the American private economy created almost 0 net jobs in the past 12 months. 0. And the unemployment rate, the number that is presented on the evening news as the definitive measure of labor market health, does not count people who have stopped looking for work. It does not count people who are working 15 hours a week but need 40. It does not count people who took a $17 per hour contract position after losing an $85,000 salaried job with benefits. It does not count the 58-year-old who sent out 200 resumes and got 2 interviews and 0 offers and eventually stopped trying because the rejection itself was destroying her health. The real unemployment rate, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls the U6 measure, and which includes discouraged workers and those working part-time for economic reasons, is consistently 3 to 4 percentage points higher than the headline number. When they tell you unemployment is 4.4%, the actual underemployment and discouraged worker rate is closer to 8%. That is 1 in 12 Americans who want to work full-time and cannot, and the workers who do have jobs are not safe either. Goldman Sachs estimates 16,000 jobs displaced by AI every month. White-collar knowledge work, the category that protected the college-educated middle class for 3 decades, is now the category most exposed to automation. Paralegals, analysts, copywriters, customer service representatives, data entry specialists, junior programmers, mid-level managers, whose primary function is information synthesis. AI does not displace these workers in a single dramatic announcement. It displaces them gradually, 1 position at a time, 1 budget cycle at a time, 1 we're restructuring the team email at a time. The displacement is invisible in the aggregate data until it is not. And by the time it shows up in the unemployment rate, the humans it displaced have already been absorbing the damage for months or years. And here is what the labor market data does not capture, that your body already knows. The quality of the jobs that exist has deteriorated alongside the quantity. The Century Foundation documented that 53% of working-class Americans are paid hourly, compared to 27% of college-educated workers. Hourly work means no guaranteed hours, no paid sick leave in many states, no retirement contributions, no employer-sponsored health care in many cases, and the constant stress of scheduling uncertainty that makes it impossible to plan childcare, medical appointments, or a second job because you do not know what hours you will be working next week. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City surveyed oilfield workers and found that the break-even price for oil needed to justify a substantial increase in drilling was $86 per barrel. Below that price, jobs do not come back. Equipment sits idle. Service companies lay off crews. And the communities that depend on energy employment enter a depression that the national unemployment rate does not register because the national number averages their devastation with the prosperity of the technology corridors that are still hiring. The low-hire, low-fire equilibrium that Stanford describes is experienced at the national level as stability. It is experienced at the individual level as paralysis. You cannot get hired. You cannot get fired. You cannot move. You cannot negotiate. You cannot advance. You can only stay in place while the cost of staying in place rises every month. Your children are inheriting a country that is measurably worse than the one your parents handed you, and the data is undeniable. The average American born in 1950 earned more in inflation-adjusted terms by age 30 than their parents had earned at the same age, with a probability of approximately 90%. The average American born in 1980 had only a 50% chance of earning more than their parents at the same age. That is a collapse from 90% to 50% in a single generation. The data was published by Stanford economist Raj Chetty, and it has been replicated and confirmed by multiple independent research teams. The American dream, defined as the reasonable expectation that your children will do better than you did, has gone from a near certainty to a coin flip in 30 years. And the generation born after 1990 is almost certainly below 50%. The cost of a college education has risen 1,200% since 1980, faster than any other category of American spending. Student loan debt has crossed $1.8 trillion. The average graduate carries approximately $37,000 in debt at graduation. And the degree that was supposed to guarantee entry into the middle class no longer guarantees anything, because the middle class itself has been hollowed out by the same forces that made the degree expensive. Housing that a single-income household could afford in 1975 now requires 2 incomes plus a side hustle plus parental assistance for the down payment. Childcare that cost $200 per month in 1990 now costs $1,100 per month. Health insurance that an employer covered at 80% in 1995 now requires employee contributions of $500 to $800 per month, with a $3,500 family deductible on top. And the Economic Policy Institute found that the cost of childcare now exceeds the cost of college tuition in 38 states. The generation that is supposed to be building families, buying homes, saving for retirement, and driving the consumer economy forward is instead servicing debt, renting indefinitely, delaying children because they cannot afford them, and watching the financial milestones their parents achieved at 30 recede into their 40s, and then their 50s, and then into the category of things that used to be possible in this country but are not anymore. 7 in 10 Americans said in a 2025 poll that raising a child is unaffordable, up from 58% a year earlier. Bloomberg reported that the United States may see its first population decline in 2026. Americans are not having children because they cannot afford to have children. The country is failing the most basic test of civilizational continuity, the test of whether it can reproduce its own population, because the cost of creating and raising a human life exceeds the financial capacity of the majority of its citizens. And the consequences extend beyond economics, into the fabric of social life. Marriage rates have declined to their lowest level in American history. The decline tracks almost perfectly with the decline in real wages among non-college educated Americans since the 1970s. Fewer marriages mean fewer stable 2-income households. Fewer stable households mean fewer children raised in environments that support educational attainment and social mobility. Fewer children with educational attainment means a smaller future tax base to fund the Social Security and Medicare that the current generation is depending on. The demographic feedback loop is self-reinforcing, and it is accelerating. Homeownership among Americans under 35 has declined from 43.6% in 2004 to approximately 37% today. That 6.6 percentage point decline represents millions of young families building zero equity, accumulating zero housing wealth, and entering middle age with no asset base. Their parents accumulated housing wealth that funded retirements, college educations, and emergency funds. This generation is accumulating rent receipts, and the wealth gap between homeowners and renters is the difference between a family that can absorb a $5,000 medical emergency and a family that cannot, between a family that retires with security and a family that works until their body fails because there is no alternative. The social contract between generations, the promise that each generation leaves the next one better positioned, has been broken, and the generation that broke it is not the generation paying the price. The infrastructure beneath your feet is rotting and nobody is fixing it because there is no money left after the interest payments. The American Society of Civil Engineers grades American infrastructure on a scale from A to F every 4 years. The most recent report card gave the United States a cumulative grade of C-. Drinking water systems received a C-. Wastewater infrastructure received a D+. Roads received a D. Bridges received a C. The electrical grid received a C-. Dams received a D. Levees received a D. Public transit received a D-. The estimated investment required to bring American infrastructure to a state of good repair is $3.8 trillion. And federal interest payments on the national debt have now crossed $1 trillion per year, consuming 34% of all federal tax revenue. Which means that the money that would be needed to rebuild the roads, bridges, water systems, dams, levees, and transit networks that the American economy depends on is being sent to bondholders instead. Every dollar that goes to interest is a dollar that does not go to the water main that has been leaking for 15 years in your neighborhood. Every dollar that goes to interest is a dollar that does not go to the bridge that has been rated structurally deficient since 2011 and that you drive across every morning on your way to work. Every dollar that goes to interest is a dollar that does not go to the electrical grid that came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of total collapse in Texas in February 2021, and that has not been meaningfully upgraded since. The infrastructure that previous generations built with public investment in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s is now at the end of its designed lifespan. Concrete lasts 50 to 75 years. Steel reinforcement corrodes. Water pipes made of lead and cast iron degrade. Electrical transformers wear out, and the replacement investment has been deferred for 30 years because the political system is structurally incapable of funding long-term infrastructure in a world where the debt service alone consumes more than the entire defense budget. You can feel it. You can feel it in the pothole that has been there for 3 years, in the water that tastes different than it used to, in the power outage that happens every time there is a storm, in the train that is late every day, in the airport terminal that was last renovated in 1998, in the school building that has mold in the ceiling and no air conditioning in classrooms where the temperature reaches 95 degrees in September. The physical fabric of the country is degrading beneath your feet in real time, and it is degrading because the money that should be maintaining it is being consumed by the interest on debt that was accumulated to fund tax cuts and wars and bailouts that did not benefit the people who are now driving across the structurally deficient bridge. The feeling in your chest when you open your bank app is not anxiety. It is information and your body is telling you the truth. There is a reason that the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index hit the lowest reading in 75 years of measurement in April 2026. Lower than during any previous war, recession, financial crisis, or pandemic. The reason is not that Americans are pessimistic by nature. The reason is not that social media is making them anxious. The reason is not that the news cycle is negative. The reason is that the data that Americans encounter in their daily lives, the grocery receipt, the rent check, the insurance premium, the gas pump, the medical bill, the credit card statement, the job listing that pays $22 per hour for a position that required a bachelor's degree, is telling them a story that contradicts the story being told on the evening news. The evening news says the economy is growing. The grocery receipt says the economy is eating them alive. The evening news says inflation is cooling. The insurance premium says it doubled. The evening news says jobs are strong. The 200 unanswered resumes say the jobs are not there, and when the data you experience contradicts the data you are told, you do not resolve the contradiction by believing the television. You resolve it by believing your body. Your body knows. Your chest tightens when you open the bank app and see the balance lower than it should be after a full month of work. Your stomach drops when you calculate what the new insurance premium means for the rest of the budget. Your jaw clenches when you see the price of the item you have been buying for 20 years and the tag says $8.49 when your body remembers it was $4.99. That is not anxiety, that is information. Your nervous system is processing real data about a real threat to your material survival, and it is producing the physiological response that evolution designed for exactly this situation. The response that says something is wrong: move, protect yourself, prepare. And every American who has been feeling that response for the past 2 years, who has been told by politicians and economists and television anchors that the feeling is wrong, that the economy is actually fine, that the numbers say you should be happy, deserves to hear someone say the words that the data has been screaming. Something is wrong. You are right. And the people whose job it is to fix it are not fixing it, because fixing it would require them to confront the people and the institutions that are profiting from the breakage. And those people fund the campaigns and employ the lobbyists and sit on the boards and own the networks that are telling you the economy is fine. The economy is not fine. You knew that before I said it. Your body told you. Every receipt confirmed it. And every night you lay awake doing math in your head that does not add up was another night the data proved you right, while the television told you that you were wrong. You were not wrong. You were the most reliable data source in the room, because you are the one living it. And the gap between what you are told and what you experience is not closing, it is widening. Every month that passes with 2.4% headline inflation and 30 to 80% cumulative price increases in essentials widens the gap. Every month that passes with 4.4% unemployment and zero net non-healthcare job creation widens the gap. Every month that passes with strong GDP growth and record low consumer sentiment widens the gap. The dashboard was built for a different economy, an economy where a job meant a career, where a paycheck covered the bills, where a degree guaranteed the middle class, where a home was an investment, not a lifetime of debt, where healthcare was a right of employment, not a lottery, where retirement was funded by pensions, not by individual speculation in a market that crashes every decade and takes a portion of your future with it each time. That economy does not exist anymore. The dashboard still measures as if it does. And the feeling in your chest when you open the bank app is your body telling you what the dashboard refuses to say. Something is wrong. You can feel it in the weight of every bill, in the silence of every unanswered application, in the math that does not work no matter how many times you recalculate it at 2 a.m., in the conversation you had with your spouse about whether you can afford the prescription this month or whether it can wait until next month when maybe there will be a little more room, in the look on your child's face when you say not right now to something that should not require a financial decision, in the slow grinding erosion of the standard of living that was supposed to improve with each year of hard work and instead has declined with each year of rising costs that your paycheck cannot match. The feeling is not wrong. The feeling is the most accurate economic indicator available to any American alive today. Trust it and act on it. Because the institutions that should be validating your experience are the same institutions that benefit from denying it.